What if a robot could help a person who was unable to move or speak do things like opening the fridge, closing the blinds, or even scratching an itch? Hello, you're listening to Where What If Becomes What's Next from Carnegie Mellon University, where we ask the bold questions that will become innovations for the betterment of humanity. In a two-part episode on healing with intelligence, we're exploring how robots, artificial intelligence, and an emerging new technology called quantum science are transforming healthcare by helping doctors to better diagnose, monitor, and treat illness. In Part 1, we'll provide a sampling of some of those new technologies and then meet a CMU scientist who has invented several AI-powered healthcare devices, including a wearable AI-powered camera that can help clinicians avoid medication errors while reducing risks and improving patient care. The healthcare system is facing mounting challenges, including staffing shortages, rising costs, and an aging population requiring more complex care. AI, robotics, and other emerging technologies offer promising solutions by automating routine tasks, performing precise surgical procedures, and analyzing vast amounts of medical data to improve outcomes. While these innovative technologies can help address the growing gap between healthcare demand and available resources, they are also improving access to care for underserved populations and allowing healthcare providers to focus more of their time on direct patient care and complex medical decision-making. To this end, scientists and researchers at CMU are developing innovative technologies that are ushering in this new era of medical care. For example, at CMU, super microscopes are being used to map the optic nerve to help make vision-restoring whole eye transplants a reality. Medical imaging, powered by AI, is enabling researchers to discover new connections in the brain that could lead to breakthroughs in Parkinson's disease. And exoskeletons and robotics are being used to help individuals with motor impairments regain autonomy and a better quality of life. And that's where a robot scratching an itch comes in. A team of CMU scientists developed an innovative head-worn assistive teleoperation interface, or HAT for short, that allows a patient to control a mobile robot with the patient's head motion and speech recognition. Using the HAT, an immobile patient can command the robot to perform daily tasks, such as closing the blinds, opening the fridge, adjusting a blanket, helping to get dressed, feeding them dinner, and even scratching an annoying itch. Robotic innovations like HAT can offer autonomy and hope to the more than 5 million people in the United States who live with some form of paralysis and may struggle with everyday tasks. To learn more about these transformative technologies, let's bring on our special guest for today's episode, Justin Chan, an assistant professor at CMU in the School of Computer Science and the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department. At CMU, Justin has focused his research and development around creating AI-powered medical devices that interface with smartphones to solve some of healthcare's more daunting challenges. Justin, what led you to this approach?
So one big aspect of challenge here is that if you look at the traditional way that medical devices are created, they're created for a single golden calibrated piece of hardware that can cost thousands of dollars, which can introduce health inequity issues. So if you're born in a low and middle income country, it's really hard to access this sort of care. But even in a high income country like the US, depending on the zip code that you live in, you may not have access to state-of-the-art healthcare. A lot of the work that I do is focused around creating intelligent systems for mobile health. And the idea here really is how can we leverage ubiquitous smart devices and sensors for health diagnostics that can provide high clinical accuracies but at substantially lower costs.
Better accuracy, lower cost, greater access using smart devices that almost everyone has. That makes perfect sense. And you applied this approach to help solve a major healthcare problem, when patients accidentally get the wrong medicine or the wrong dose of medicine. Tell us about this project.
To set the context here, medication errors result in hundreds of thousands of deaths every year in the US. And these errors often occur when a clinician needs to prepare a drug to be injected, and they have to take medication from a vial into a syringe and draw it up. But oftentimes, they may pick up a mislabeled syringe or the wrong vial and drop the wrong medication, which gets erroneously administered into the patient. And this is obviously really dangerous because it can result in death and harm. So it's important in this project to see if we can find a way to catch these errors early before medication injection. And there's room here for an automated AI solution that can potentially audit or provide this sort of secondary check to be like a co-pilot and nudge doctors in the right direction when they potentially might be making these errors by accident.
So tell me more about your innovation, a wearable camera powered by AI that can help solve this problem.
Absolutely. So as we were kind of looking at the landscape today in terms of how these medication errors are detected, they can primarily be divided into barcode scanning, where you manually have to scan this barcode, or you have to manually enter this into the electronic health record. But this relies heavily on human compliance and in like a high pressure environment like the operating room.
And that's when mistakes can happen, right?
So that's what really motivated us to see if we can have an automated solution that leverages wearables and AI that can detect these errors. So to the invention itself, one thing that we noticed was that in the OR, these doctors were often wearing eye protection that can act as a safety barrier against fluids and so on. And we thought, well, this is kind of similar to augmented reality glasses, which often also have cameras on them. And we were wondering if you could create a wearable camera system that can visually detect these medication errors before they can occur. And we like to think of it almost like a second set of eyes that can verify the work. And the idea is that if you run these computer vision algorithms to detect what's in the vial and what's in the syringe and kind of read off visual cues from these labels, you can figure out in real time if an error has occurred and produce an auditory alert to the clinician and give a warning prior to administration.
Did you build a camera from scratch for this?
So we leveraged an off-the-shelf GoPro camera, and this was recording at a high resolution of 4K. And the reason for this, actually a challenge in this project, is that these labels are actually pretty small. You can imagine if you're wearing a camera on your head and the label is pretty far away, it's pretty hard to see. So you need a high-resolution camera that can read as much of the text as possible and capture visual cues like the color and the shape of the syringe and the vial and use that to classify the object.
Is that camera then watching everything the clinician or doctor is doing?
So a big challenge with this system, especially if you can imagine deploying it, is privacy, because you don't want this system to be recording the data of patients, the faces of patients and the faces of doctors, and uploading it to some cloud system. As you can imagine, there are a lot of malpractice implications and privacy implications to this. So we designed our system in a privacy-first manner to ensure that all the algorithms can run in real time on an embedded wearable device itself. Privacy is indeed one important component, but it's also important that we run our algorithms to produce a warning in time before an injection takes place. And in our measurement, we figured out that the median time between drug preparation to injection was 2 seconds. So basically, you need to produce that warning within that 2-second period of time. And the only way to actually be able to do that is to do the computation locally on the device, because if you send it to the cloud to do the computation, that actually potentially would take way too long to upload that data and get the result back.
How did you get the AI on the device smart enough to detect possible errors in split seconds? I'm assuming you trained the AI with big data sets of information.
Yes, so we recorded data in both a real-world operating room setting and a controlled environment setting. And in the real-world operating room setting, we only captured events that did not have mistakes. So there were no actual mistakes in those recordings. Otherwise, that would be disastrous if we actually captured real recordings of error being caused that could lead to some ethical issues. So because of that, we went to a controlled setting and simulated errors using the same setup, but just not in real patients.
And then with that data, what kind of alert does it send the doctor if it recognizes a potential problem?
We figured that an auditory approach with kind of a small beeping sound in the ear using like an open ear speaker would be the best way to kind of alert the doctor subtly that an error might be occurring.
In these trials, how accurate was your device?
Of all the errors that we captured, 99.6% were correctly detected as errors. And of the normal events without any errors, 98.8% were correctly flagged as not containing an error.
That's amazing accuracy and could be life-saving. I read that in the real world, in operating rooms, clinics, physician rooms, there's about a 5% error rate for medicine delivery and dosing. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. So in terms of drug delivery events, the error rates are estimated between 5 to 10%. And in terms of other metrics, this results in up to 1.2 million hospitalizations annually and over $5 billion in associated costs.
Were there any major obstacles to getting your invention created?
Yeah, so the major issue here is that in a real world setting, people aren't posing for the camera to actually detect the error. They're actually doing their job. So what that means is that they're probably moving around pretty fast. So there's going to be motion blur. The background is going to be pretty messy. There's going to be syringes and vials in the background as well. And the labels are really small and you can't always read the text exactly. So in these real world settings, the only way to have a system that generalizes is to collect a very extensive data set that covers these real world conditions. So this has to be multiple hospitals, different lighting settings from bright to dim, and different colors of syringes and vials in order to actually get this to generalize. And that was really the main solution, which is the diversity of real world conditions.
The doctors who were part of your trials, how did they respond?
They actually really embraced this technology. The vast majority of these participants mentioned that if there was such a system that could accurately detect these medication errors, they would adopt it.
So what's next for your innovation?
So I would say there are two next steps. First is seeing how this works in other medical environments like the intensive care unit and the general hospital setting. And the second is expanding the set of tasks that this system can do, such as detecting drug dosage levels, or say detecting when a patient is being turned over and positioned. And the idea is that AI is a very powerful tool here because it can minimize documentation and allow doctors to really focus on the patient in front of them and lead to kind of a more human-centered version of medicine where AI is operating seamlessly in the background to augment your workflow. This type of technology can potentially be used beyond medication errors. This could be used in the surgical setting, for example, to guide surgeons with the way that they do their surgery and guide them in terms of how to improve technique and things and so on and so forth.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about some of your other transformative projects, inventions that integrate with devices almost everyone has around the home.
This podcast is brought to you by Carnegie Mellon University. Located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, CMU is a private, international research university, consistently ranked among the top universities in the world. Its trailblazing research is focused on creating, defining, and accelerating the future of artificial intelligence. For more information, please visit ai.cmu.edu.
Welcome back. You're listening to Where What If Becomes What's Next from Carnegie Mellon University. And we're talking with Justin Chan from CMU's School of Computer Science. Earlier, we talked about how this latest invention, a wearable camera powered by AI, could help save lives from errors in medication delivery or dosing. Justin, you've developed other medical inventions that tap into the power of smart devices just about everyone has.
So the overarching strategy is how we can leverage the existing sensors on smart devices. So this can include smartphones, smart speakers, smart glasses, and wireless earbuds to detect various physiological signs and perform medical diagnostics outside the hospital, especially when there is so much more data that you can collect.
One of your inventions can help detect ear infections in kids faster and more accurately by using a smartphone. As a parent whose kids have suffered through many ear infections, I would have loved that kind of help.
Ear infections are actually the number one reason that children have to see a doctor today, and it occurs because of buildup of fluid behind the eardrum. So typically, you might go to see a doctor and they'll visually inspect your ear, but the accuracies are actually very low in terms of actually figuring out if there's fluid behind the eardrum. So another option is you can go to see a specialist, which is more accurate, but that takes a lot longer in terms of wait time. So we figured out how you can actually leverage the speakers and the microphones at the base of practically all modern smartphones to probe for the mobility of the eardrum and detect if there's fluid behind it. And the idea here is you can imagine if you had a cup of water, depending on how much fluid is in this cup, if I tap on it, it's going to sound different. So similarly, if we envelop the base of a smartphone with a paper cone, place it outside the ear, and send an acoustic signal towards the eardrum, depending on how much fluid is behind the ear, the received signal sounds different, and you can classify these signals to figure out whether there's fluid or not behind the ear. And the really cool thing here is that we were able to achieve specialist level accuracies with our system and also have it usable enough by parents and untrained providers.
So it's a paper cone-like device that attaches to your smartphone, and then an app diagnoses the reading. Sounds fantastic. Where can I get one?
So it is currently being commercialized by a startup right now, Wearable Diagnostics, and the device is FDA listed and is available for use at select healthcare facilities.
That is going to be transformative. Must be exciting to see Wavely DX bring it to market.
Absolutely. A large focus of my work is figuring out how we can take a technology that works in a lab and really get it to generalize to a much wider clinical population. And once you've been able to bridge that gap, that's kind of one of the main hurdles into actually being able to translate it out to have impact in the real world.
You created a similar device that works with smartphones to test a newborn's hearing. It's called an earable device. Tell us about that.
In high-income countries like the US, pretty much every child will get screened for hearing at birth at about 1 month of age. But the equipment to do this tends to be pretty expensive. And the reason for this is pretty interesting. Normally, for a child, you can't just send sounds into their ear and ask them if they can hear a sound to screen for their hearing because they're probably asleep and they can't respond to you. So what we've found is that this really cool phenomenon about the ear, where if you send sound into the ear, within the cochlea, the hair cells will actually respond and it will actually generate really soft sounds of its own in response to any sound that you send it. And if you had a very sensitive microphone, you can pick out these super soft sounds and get a profile of hearing along the entire cochlea. But as you can imagine, such a device is pretty expensive and it's inaccessible to low and middle income countries like Kenya, where hearing screening is inaccessible to the vast majority of the population. So we created an earable system that costs about $10 and that can plug into a smartphone. That's a probe that goes straight into the ear to actually probe for these super soft sounds and in real time compute the hearing profile of a newborn child. And that is undergoing deployments in Kenya right now. And we've shown that our device is comparable to these $5,000 devices in terms of clinical performance. So there's largely no decrease or compromise in terms of the performance, but you get orders of magnitude lower cost savings.
A $10 device comparable to a $5,000 device. I could see that being used around the world.
Absolutely. As you can imagine, in the US, it took several decades actually to have this universal newborn hearing screening policy rolled out across the nation. And not all countries have that. So this could be deployed, especially in low and middle income countries, or even in certain high income countries, that could alleviate a lot of the health inequity burdens.
It makes so much sense to use common smart devices to integrate with medical testing innovations. In addition to using smartphones, you invented a device that uses a smart speaker to actually detect when someone is having a heart attack. Is that right?
Cardiac arrest is one of the most common ways that people pass away. And unfortunately, you can't just go into a hospital and have a prediction that you're going to have a cardiac arrest in the next 10 minutes. Most of the time, this occurs at home when the patient is alone and oftentimes when they're sleeping. And yes, you could wear an expensive wearable device like an Apple Watch, but oftentimes people may not be able to afford that or wear a device when they're asleep. So what we have tried to do in this invention here is to leverage an audible biomarker that occurs in about 50% of cardiac arrests. And it's called agonal breathing, which is this sharp gasping noise that a person emits just as the cardiac arrest is occurring. And using an Amazon Alexa, which is always listening for the wake word Alexa, can instead listen for this key audible biomarker, detect it, and in real time contact emergency medical services to come in time to perform CPR.
That's incredible. Can this smart speaker detect the onset of other diseases or medical events?
Absolutely. You can imagine that this would work for detecting a wide range of medical disorders too. This could potentially be used to detect audible markers associated with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, where oftentimes speech starts to slur over time. And if you can detect those changes over time with your smartphone, your smart speaker, this can result in early intervention.
And not just early intervention. By using these relatively low-cost and ubiquitous smart devices, you're bringing healthcare to populations around the world who otherwise may not have access to this kind of care.
Yes, that is a fair assessment. Most of these smart devices are incredibly cheap that even in a low and middle income country, you can buy a budget smartphone for about $50 and have a lot of the same sensing capabilities as the high-end smartphones today in the US. You have access to speakers, microphones, vibration motors, cameras, and in some cases, even LiDAR or near-infrared sensors for night vision. And you can imagine that there are a lot of interesting things that we can do there as well.
Justin, what's next for technology in 2025?
The next big AI model, probably, but technology and innovation has been growing at an exponential rate that it's pretty much impossible to predict what's going to be next. So my philosophy in the matter is maybe don't speculate about the future. You should be focused on inventing the future yourself, because that's the best way to control the future.
And finally, Justin, what's next for you?
I'm pretty interested in creating AI mobile systems for public health. So things for the next pandemic, how can we empower epidemiologists to understand the spread of disease better in this public health space? So you could create, say, contactless AI technologies that could get your breathing rate or your heart rate, not just in an airport, but say in the bus stop or in the library. And in these public settings, you could potentially have a real-time map of the spread of disease, which could be useful not just for the pandemic, but for the flu and monitoring health trends at scale and in a cost-effective way is sort of thing that I'm pretty interested in pursuing in the future.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks to my guest, Justin Chan, and thanks to you for listening. Be sure to tune in for part 2 of Healing with Intelligence, where we'll talk about an emerging new technology, quantum science, and how scientists at CMU are using it to better detect and diagnose diseases such as pneumonia. Please check the show notes where you'll find links to additional resources for this episode. And to learn more or contact us with a story, idea, or comments, please visit cmu.edu/what's-next-podcast. If you are enjoying the show, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast site and share with friends. And be sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. I'm Randy Scott, and you've been listening to Where What If Becomes What's Next from Carnegie Mellon University, where we are asking the bold questions that become innovations for the betterment of humanity. Stay tuned and stay curious.